Okay, this is the second part of the first part, so this is part B, and it starts with the horrid plague. During the mid-1800s, the traditional power of the state-backed church was more and more beginning to lose its hold on the people's minds. Most people agree that this had something to do with the melting pot, quote-unquote, effect that was happening around the time of the Industrial Revolution. People were emigrating in large numbers from all over Europe, and because of all of their suffering in the old world, they wanted to make a better life for themselves in what was popularly characterized as this new land of opportunity. Right around this time, several intelligent entrepreneurs began what would become multi-million-dollar enterprises. Now, they understood how business worked. They had internalized the values of business, and they didn't, so they were basically going to work and I'm making a comment, this isn't part of the manuscript, but anyway, they were going to work for the interests that they understood, and that was basically statecraft. If you think about Machiavellian statecraft, they were basically deployed to go to make a living exploiting the basic business and statecraft that basically didn't like the masses coming in, overwhelming them in different ways with this melting pot effect, and having to keep them under control, under wraps, basically. Okay. So right around this time, several intelligent entrepreneurs began what would become multi-million-dollar enterprises. One of these was a man by the name of Dr. John Harvey Kellogg of Battle Creek, Michigan. Dr. Kellogg, along with his now famous brother W.K., was bent upon promoting a product that he had produced during his work in the budding mental health field. Together they produced a product that was designed, like many others of the era, to help people. Today, the company that grew from the efforts of the good doctor and his younger brother has become a world-renowned influential corporation. But back then, these men were unknown. They may well have remained so, hadn't they had a very interesting gimmick, something that could place them apart from the competition. Official history tells us that, and that's the first footnote, by the way. Official history tells us that today's Kellogg's Corporation owes its success to these men's original product, Kellogg's Corn Flakes. But conscious people would wonder how such a product could have ever survived decades of ever-heightening competition without some kind of powerful marketing tactics, some kind of gimmick. Though so-called forgotten today, the gimmick used to promote this nostalgic, American-made product was that it was promoted as an aid to help kids refrain from the most hideous and unclean social problem of that day, self-abuse or masturbation. Yes, in the 1880s, one of the loudest trumpeted social hysterias, second perhaps only to anti-Indian hysteria, that is American Indian hysteria, was childhood masturbation. Don't believe it? Then perhaps you should read over the elder Kellogg's brothers' expert book, Plain Facts for Old and Young, published in 1888, now on the internet in full. And note how well regarded Dr. Kellogg was and which esteemed organizations he belonged to, and got paraded openly in the front of the book, ostensibly to help the so-called well-educated people trust him and his credentials. Thusly, the esteemed Dr. Kellogg and his younger brother W.K., along with a few others like Sylvester Graham and his cracker, began to become more widely known and got ahead of the competition. These intelligent businessmen were learning about what kinds of things got their market's attention. And while helping society to stop the ever-creeping epidemic which was causing all sorts of suffering and unwanted deviance, they could make nice careers for themselves and their colleagues in the newly germinating mental health profession. And footnote number 2 comes here. Imagine if modern methods of communication had been available to these friendly professionals who wanted so much to help their fellow men face this unfortunate social problem as it was then framed. Imagine if they had been able to go on television shows like Oprah or The Jerry Springer Show, or do made-for-TV docudramas like those later appearing on HBO and PBS. Imagine, that is HBO TV and PBS TV. Imagine such experts of those days getting on the air with all of their scientific data and research. Imagine how they all could have gotten their supposed helpfulness out to all who obviously needed it, all to benefit greatly suffering people and end the appalling plague of self-abusers. Certainly enlightened audiences would listen and be so relieved that so many trustworthy experts were finally attending to this wrong, which was responsible for so much pain and heartache. The good citizens would breathlessly follow the expert guidance and responsibly buy the recommended antidotes, self-help books, medical remedies, and even specially designed clothing. Finally, in the spirit of aiding the next generation towards a healthier start than their adults had had as kids, the well-informed public would do as they were told. In the morning, they would feed their children Kellogg's cornflakes, in the afternoon, graham crackers, and at night, they'd dress them in certain snugly fitting scientific devices which were designed to house their child's genitals safe and sound. And when the youngins grew up, they would no doubt be so thrilled about how their society cared so much that they would certainly pass the so-called helpful tradition on. Is it not true? Yet, even without the benefit of modern forms of communication, the self-abuse, quote-unquote, gimmick was a great success if our continued guilt about our secret pastime bears any witness. It is interesting to look back at this today and study what happened. Those who participated in what became a heightened emotional outcry in its leading and supporting roles were members of a group of people. This group shared a mindset about society and how it was to be dealt with, and they took great pride in being the, quote, the more intelligent members of the community, unquote, as these, quote, progressive, unquote, intellectuals call themselves, in having this ability to steer the incompetent masses onto a proper field of thought. By tapping into their readily available ignorance and fear, the entrepreneurs were able to carry out their charitable duties. Here, it is crucial to closely examine the South End Press book, or Online Speech Media Control by Chomsky, where below the heading Spectator Democracy, he goes over the thought of people like Reinhold Niebuhr, Edward Bernays, and Harold Lasswell, all exceptional in their ability to lead and influence the thought of elites, adding significantly, and the elites including the Kennedy intellectuals, for example, adding significantly to older conceptions like Machiavelli's assumptions and projections, and bigotry. The state-backed church had managed such resources with its conveniently flexible biblical interpretations in the past, but now that it was losing control, it was important that someone else with the proper authority regain the lost ground. That could be an interesting discussion right there, you know. So the leading minds of that era realized that they had to adapt to these changes they didn't want but couldn't stop, changes that were weakening the grip of the traditional state-backed church and allowing the masses to become too independent again. They had to adapt to these changes, and what better way than to form a new state-backed religion based on another kind of conveniently flexible interpretation. And that goes to note 4. The clergy of this new church, along with their hallowed new Bible, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, were continually making quote-unquote new findings that had an interesting way of becoming all-encompassing truth and social policy. That is, until after much suffering, someone could discover, quote-unquote, the actual truth, or at least something maybe a little bit closer. Thus we had the terrible social problem of childhood masturbation in the 1880s. That worked. It worked very well, and it taught a lesson. Propaganda, when supported by the trustworthy leaders, and when no legitimate deviation is permitted from it, can have a big effect. It was a lesson learned by the eugenics movement and many others, and it has been pursued to this day.